So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and we make a return to the test build of the upcoming new patch today, and a few factions as well involved, one in particular that we haven't seen in quite a while actually on the test build, and that is Umbar. This is the faction which this map is heavily based around, this map created by Tommy, so big thank you to him. And yeah, we have another sort of cityscape style map, although this one is a little bit more based around outer choke points and then inner choke points. I think in terms of the defensive structure of this one, it does the defenders a few more favours perhaps than some of the replays we've seen recently, where it's been a little bit more labyrinthine within the settlements that they've been attempting to defend, and the terrain has not always been to their favour. But it is another 4v4 as well, so we shall see if the quality of Umbar is going to be enough to help them hold on to this defensive position. And it's an Umbar redemption arc today, because Amroth is also at the centre of this defence, and they will be facing off against the forces of darkness, who will be trying to bring them both to heel today. Going to be interesting to see how this particular matchup works out as well. Plenty of numbers on the attack, plenty of armour piercing, and Umbar, of course, usually among the evil factions, one of the most staunchly high quality factions that there are, so there's going to be plenty of quality on the defence today. Amroth will bring a bit of their own, albeit in terms of infantry they are far more hyper-focused than Umbar in that regard, but we'll see. Interesting matchup here. Obviously also an entirely human defence, even with Amroth's slightly more exotic bloodline, I guess you could say, although, you know, Black Numenorians, slight bit of elven blood in Amroth. We'll see. But for the attackers, first and foremost, the forces of evil, and still under the thumb of Sauron, we find the Haradran Y2K86 very different to the defenders in the sense that they forego a lot of the defensive benefits of having that armour, and instead focus a little bit more on savage attacks and armour piercing, which will be fairly universally useful against not only Amroth as it is against most of the kingdoms of the West, but also against their near neighbours in Umbar as well, though much like the Gondorians, both Umbar and Amroth do have strengths in areas where Harad are weak as well, so should be an interesting matchup on this flank. Southron Warband here, cheap spears, but again they are offset by that little bit of armour piercing that they do gain, so individually they may not be able to withstand the kind of punishment coming their way, but if you can combine them with another kind of unit, they can do just that little bit of extra damage against the right targets, which really makes them worthwhile. And of course, being spears, they are also anti-cavalry, which could come into play later on. Upgraded dismounted serpent guard as well. This is where Harad are at their most solid and stable in comparison to many of the other human kingdoms. However, with their heavy infantry, they still don't have the same sort of armour values as some of the very best. Even with this armour upgrade, their shield value is also slightly lower. But like I said, in the same way that much of the Harad faction is, for the tier of unit that they are actually pretty damaging as well. So we'll see how well they can do against what many would consider their betters on this occasion, but it does at least allow Harad to be a bit more competitive when it comes to staying in the fight a little longer, though they will need to be backed up by the armour piercing that Harad are plentiful in, and the Muhard Berserkers, while they may be cheap, we have seen this kind of cheap shock infantry recently be very, very effective, so we'll see if that's going to be the case again, though they will have to be a little bit careful given the fact that all of the defenders do have access to some pretty good heavy archers, which will be able to cut through Muhards pretty quickly, especially the Berserkers, seeing as they don't even have a shield. Just in behind we do have the Muhard Beast Hunters as well, who do have a little bit of a shield, but other than that they are still pretty vulnerable to arrows. But this is also the first example of a Harad throwing projectile unit, which is another one of the main focuses of this faction, of course, and is also one of the ways in which they can really impress themselves on this battle. In any sort of siege battle, the throwing projectiles Harad have are going to be a real weapon, especially the Demons of the Desert back here, one of the Trollmen variants, and of course with their projectiles, very, very devastating. As far as specialty projectiles go, they are one of the more difficult to use. They are pretty easy to mow down with concentrated archer fire given their lack of armour, complete lack of armour, but they are still very devastating, especially if you can hit them in a really dense defensive block of infantry. Armour piercing damage as well, it's the sort of thing which the defenders really need to try and avoid if at all possible. Southron Pikemen, cheap pikes can be really efficient, and Southron Pikemen perhaps even more so because of that slightly more damage that they can deal for the tier of unit that they are, but we have seen in the past that they are so fragile that if anything disrupts their formation, be it ranged attacks or any sort of infantry getting in and amongst them, they can fall apart very quickly. So they do need support around them to be as effective as they possibly can be. But potentially lots of value to be had there. Southron archers, in terms of elongated skirmish fight, the defenders should have all of the advantages there, especially against Harad. But it is important to at least contest that sort of fight, put a bit of pressure on the enemy from afar. It means that at the very least their archers aren't having everything their own way. So that's a good bring from Harad as well, a couple of units of them. We've got the Black Serpent Bodyguard, which very quick, very dangerous off the charge as well, pretty expensive, and Harad's cavalry, they do have access to the camels, but all of the other cav is either very light horse archers or very hit and run style lancers. I don't know how effective they're going to be in a siege battle like this, but we shall find out. And then Champions of Nafrat and Trollmen of Harad, so the bodyguard variant and the standard quote-unquote variant of the Trollmen. Plenty of armor piercing. Again, the armor and overall melee defense values are not particularly high, but for the cost, for the damage, and also for the resilience that the several HP each of these units have gives them, yeah, it's a good pick, especially against the armoured forces against which they shall be fighting. Now, moving on to Harad, well, more Harad actually. We've got some Haradrim Spearmen, and then we've also got Muhard Beast Hunters. So yeah, 2 Harad armies. Plenty of Haradrim Spearmen, very cheap unit of spears this. Numbers, of course, will be very important for the attackers, depending, well, not even depending, it will just be an important thing. They will need to march into some pretty hairy situations. They will be taking casualties, which means a bigger army is always going to be important, especially given how quickly Harad's army can fall away and the amount of damage they can take. Berserkers, Demons of the Desert, pretty similar other than those basic units. There are the Serpent's Fangs, or Serpent's Archers I should say, which do offer the heavy Harad skirmishing option. There's only one unit that they can bring, but in combination with having pretty much the heaviest armour any Harad unit has, and also poison projectiles, they are fairly unique among the Harad roster, but it's not really enough for them today to truly gain a handle on the long-range game, but again, it does allow them to better contest it than perhaps Y2K's army over there, but swings and roundabouts, isn't it? Y2K's got a little bit more in terms of infantry options. Moving on to the third attacking army, we have whatever that's supposed to be, and I have seen this name before, but I cannot pronounce it here. So we have Mordor, Orc Fodder, of course, leading the way. Mordor trying to bring their unruly servants back to heel. Orc Fodder won't be enough to do it on their own, but of course extremely cheap, extremely numerous. If you are going to bring a little bit more quality, which you can certainly do as Mordor, then in order to pad out your army numbers a little bit more so, Orc Fodder are the ideal unit for doing that. And they are spears at the end of the day. If cavalry just wanders into them, it can be a bit of a spider's web for them. Uruk infantry, again, very numerous and fairly decent for what they are. I mean, they're certainly not going to set the world alight with the kind of quality that they offer, but they will do the job. And again, Mordor do need that high numbers. I think it's all well and good having that extreme quality that they do have at the high end, but you do need the numbers around that in order to be a truly domineering force on the field and get the most out of Mordor. And the Uruk infantry, and here with the Uruk halberds, you can do that. Uruk halberds, of course, will be more vulnerable to any sort of defending skirmish play, but armour piercing, phalanx, potentially can punch above their weight as well, but they need to be in a good position to do that. Elsewhere, we have some Uruk archers on just the one flank actually. That will allow them, in much the same way as the Southron archers, to at least contest the long-range game, but they will likely get bullied a little bit for it. Morgul Chosen, which represent a pretty strong high-end spear unit in terms of its defensive abilities, and you can put them as a hard unit at the centre of a very numbers-focused Mordor army, and you have a block of very numerous, but with a little bit of defensive quality laced throughout it, block of units which will be quite difficult to budge. And it's the sort of thing which can keep an attack going for a fairly long period of time as long as the morale holds together. Orc Javelins, not as good as the equivalents from Harad, but numerous, cheap, exactly the sort of thing which we've seen in siege battles time and again put real pressure on the opposition team, because there's no real right way of dealing with them other than potentially cavalry. But if you use archers on them, it's valuable ammunition gone. If you just let them do their thing, it's far too much kills to feed into a unit that's so cheap. Temple Executioners here with their blackened longswords, of course, some Black Númenóreans still remaining loyal to Sauron here, attempting to bring their unruly brethren to heel. And the Temple Executioners are a very fine unit indeed, without the armour upgrade today, but it's not necessarily the most important thing. Very high melee defense, and will be able to go toe-to-toe with even the best that Umbar have to offer. Above and beyond that will be the Nazgul. We've seen the Nazgul in the past, of course, be used to deadly effect, and if you can hide them within the rest of your numbers as Mordor, it can be very, very difficult to get rid of them. We'll see if that's going to be the case here. The very dangerous Olag High as well. In this version of the game, trolls can be very difficult to stop, of course, as is the way, but they're also very expensive now. And then the Blackguard of Barad-dûr, so plenty of mass. I mean, I don't know if Mordor necessarily have the numbers to push in and swamp the defenders with all of that mass. I think they will be reliant on their allies to help them, but this does look like, well, that did look like a fairly small Mordor army, actually, in the grand scheme of things. Maybe a bit of a risk over there. And then finally we have Dabo playing as Khand. Of course, they offer armor piercing as well, maybe not to the same extent as Harad do, but they still have a main line which is built around it, and then they have maybe a little bit more of a defensive focus elsewhere, especially with their archers. They actually won't be too much on the disadvantage or back foot with their archer corps as well, although I still wouldn't say they would be able to dominate there. Nurad footmen and Nurad halberds, the classic front line here, a combination of the very high shield value and armor piercing war clubs of the footmen and the Nurad halberds. Their armor is also passable, maybe not up to the same standard as many of the Western Kingdoms of Men, but it's good enough, especially in comparison to Harad, to make a difference here. Very dangerous unit as well, and the Storm Guard, the finest unit of infantry that Khand can field. The sort of thing as well which, considering their choice of weapon and fighting style, can be a match for just about anything, and Umbar, even with their high quality, will be giving them due respect, and I'm sure we'll be trying to pick them apart from afar. Interested to see how the Brotherhood of the Wain get on. Of course, chariots, we haven't seen them yet actually, this particular chariot unit in this new patch, but chariots are always going to work the same really. If you keep them moving, they will be very effective. In narrow streets they can be a little bit more difficult to control, however, and as soon as they stop they will falter pretty quickly. The advantage the Brotherhood of the Wain have is that they are crossbowmen on the back, so the projectiles that they're firing are simultaneously long enough range in comparison to javelin chariots that they're a little bit more useful, but also have the punch that's necessary, unlike maybe the archer chariots, which maybe lack a little bit of that. And then several units of Nurad halberds and footmen, once again backed up by some archers, maybe not as many archers as I was expecting from Khand, but that could be a good thing. More infantry numbers might be necessary on this side, given how light in that department Mordor seemed to be. Very bowmen and warriors with armour upgrades. And finally some chieftains vanguard, so there are some fast movers on the field for the attackers. Not a huge amount, but they will be able to contest that should the need arise. Now then, moving on to the defenders, starting out way out here with the Womb Raider with some Corsair fencers hidden away. Could be very, very useful indeed, of course, with their throwing projectile and pretty damn good melee stats late on. If it's close, this is the sort of thing which can make a real difference. We'll have to wait and see. Much of this army does appear to be marshalling this choke point over here, which some of Khand is going to be coming over to test. I mean, there's plenty of just standard Corsairs here, which do help pad out the numbers of Umbar's otherwise fairly quality-heavy army. But, you know, having the access to these numbers may be a really good thing, because you always know that the attackers are going to be numbers-heavy to some extent. So trying to equalise in that regard does give you a little bit more flexibility across the field. It lets you at least cover all your bases a little bit easier, even if some of them are going to be covered a little bit less fervently than others. Belagar footmen here as well, basic spears, not particularly damaging, decent defensively but nothing too special. They're really designed to be the main foot soldiers that Umbar can field first. I think we've got Corsair savages in here as well, or is that just an officer in there? I think it might just be officers. Fair enough. Alcarondas Legion, however, are going to be the real backbone of this Umbar force, as well as the Axe Guard in here. Yep, Umbar Axe Guard. So armour piercing from the Umbar Axe Guard will be somewhat useful against Mordor and Khand. The Alcarondas Legion, however, will be very, very good against both. They will be subject to armour piercing damage, but the solidity that they offer on the front line is above anything that the regular units from the other factions do. Obviously they are pretty expensive and fairly small in number, however, comparatively speaking, so where you choose the engagements is going to be key for Umbar here. Corsair Blackguards in reserve, decent as a backup infantry option as well, though first and foremost those javelins are going to be absolutely vital to their efforts. We've got the Naru Naaru Sentinels in here as well, a fantastic unit of pikes, one of the best in the game. One of the most resilient as well. It's one of the few units of pikes where actually I would say going after them with archers probably isn't worth it, because of the huge armour that they have and also the front-facing shields. It means that you're really not going to do a huge amount of damage to them. You are far better off, I think, trying to take advantage of Umbar's slightly smaller armies and maybe trying to crunch these front lines when the time arises. Rangers of Castamere for that high base damage as well, and more Umbar Axe Guard in there also. another blob of infantry that's kind of difficult to pull apart. Too High playing as another Umbar force. Interesting to see this amount of mercenary crossbows. You can use them fully defensively, or you can try and sally out with them. Wouldn't recommend to sally out, given the fact that Chieftain's Vanguard can easily outrange them. There's enough archers on the field to deal with them, especially given how fragile that they are. They may don that armour, but without a shield, especially with how their numbers are, it's not really worth it. So we'll see what Too High decides to do. Corsairs, we have more Belagai footmen, so again trying to pad the numbers out a little bit, just to give them that bit more flexibility. But Alcarondas Legion once again at the heart of this defensive effort. We have more Alcarondas Legion in there, more Belagai footmen just in behind. A couple of units of the slightly cheaper Belagai pikemen. You can see here a new tier of armour upgrade for the Belagai, which makes them look far more impressive. Will help them in all regards, of course, though they are unshielded unlike the Naru and Aru, so they will still be subject to a little bit more archer damage, and even with the fully upgraded armour like this, they are not up to the same level there either, but of course cheaper all round even with the armour upgrades. Interesting capes as well that they now have. And then a couple of units of Belagai archers as well. Interesting that there's not a huge archer presence from Umbar that we've seen so far, so maybe they won't be quite so dominant at long range as I thought. I mean, ranges of Castamere of course are incredibly damaging, but they are also the sort of unit which can be counter-skirmished reasonably effectively. This is the kind of unit which you can use to dominate the long range. However, Naru and Aru Royal Guard, we already mentioned the very good armour that these units possess, and also, you know, now they come with a bow so they can contest that long range game. Locked morale as well, the Naru and Aru, so they will not falter, very similar to the veterans of Osgiliath from Gondor who are not present, but their subordinates in Dol Amroth most certainly are, played by Winged Swordsman 44. Some Dol Amroth men-at-arms with the first level of armour upgrade at the very least, so that will put them in a slightly better spot defensively, though on this side of the battlefield Harad are going to be a big part of it, so the armour will not be as much of a boon as it would otherwise be, but their own melee ability should be enough to also carve through the very lightly armoured and defended Haradrim, so this may actually be, again, that double-edged sword that Harad often have to contend with. We have the Belfast Marines, javelins again. If you were to pick between Dol Amroth and Harad, you would definitely call Harad having an advantage there, but being on the defence does mean you have the luxury of positioning. The Belfast Marines are ultimately a little bit more rigid as well, defensively, with their chainmail and slightly better shields in comparison to the Muhards, though still not a patch, of course, on the demons. The Perithal Horse Archers may be a little bit more worthwhile sallying out with them because of their longer range, and also over here on this flank against Harad they could do a lot more telling damage, shall we say. Some more Dol Amroth men-at-arms and spearmen, these without the armour upgrade, so just the chainmail. But like I said, that's not necessarily the end of the world considering who they're facing. Combination of the Haven Guard of Athalond and the Talon Knights. Talon Knights, of course, their own armour piercing not quite so useful against Harad. They may be better served going up to assist their allies against Mordor, but the Haven Guard will be very much at home taking on the unarmoured Haradrim. A couple of units of Dol Amroth archers, of course. No armour upgrade, but not necessarily needed against Harad to domineer in the skirmish stakes anyway. Although maybe not against the Serpent Archers if this is all Dol Amroth have at long range, maybe that will not be the case. Belfast Marines, and also another important bring here in the Arathirum of Dol Amroth. So between these and the 2 units of Horse Archers, Dol Amroth have invested fairly heavily in their cavalry, which is always a risk for defenders. It means it needs to pay off, otherwise you've dug yourself a real hole which is difficult to get out of. We'll see if Winged Swordsman has it in him to do that. And the final Umbar army, played by the map creator himself, Tommy. We have got some Belagai archers, fairly similar fare I think in Alcarondas Legion. He has got the Corsair crossbows, which surprised not to see them up to this point, although they could have been hidden in the 2 blobs that we've already passed because of the stopping power, and you know, armour piercing may be a part of their repertoire as well, but it's just the damage they can do quickly to targets that come in range, and of course when you're on the defence the enemy have to come in range. Several units of Corsairs, we've got the Naru and Aru Sentinels, more Belagai pikemen again with that armour upgrade, also the first instance we've seen clearly of the Harbingers of Castamere, another heavy swordsman unit which will be very much at home against the Haradrim. And then finally another clutch of Umbar units up here. Once again, plenty of Corsairs. So Umbar have gone more numbers heavy perhaps than I was initially expecting, given the amount of Corsairs that are on the field. But again, these numbers will be helpful locking down all of these front lines as long as these Corsairs are appropriately supported. More Naru and Aru Sentinels, also investing heavily in pikes as well, Umbar. and Belagair archers, as well as some Welkarondas Legion here as well. And Belagair footmen with the full level of armour upgrade as well, now taking on the appearance of the Ardenheim Shield Guard. So gold level armour upgrades perhaps. Again, that could be due to trying to squish the rosters a little bit so they can fit in as many factions as possible, but also it gives them a mainline spear unit which can be more easily upgraded now to a high standard. Defensively very strong, even if offensively they are probably still going to do damage very, very slowly, but against Harad, not necessarily the end of the world. I will make a little cut. I don't know how severe that's going to be because of the cavalry on both sides. It really depends on the defenders if they want to sally out early or not. I think maybe the horse archers might come forward. Maybe they'll try and make it a little bit of a standard skirmishing affair early and then wait to use the cavalry later. That would be my guess, but we'll see. But we'll find out momentarily. I'll rejoin when the first blows are being struck. So a mercifully quick start to this battle, as it appears, with the Dol Amroth archers already starting to open up on the Haradrim spearmen as they move along, although I don't know how much damage they're necessarily doing, or if indeed this is the kind of unit that you want to be spending too much of your valuable arrows on. But at the very least it does mean that Harad are not going to be able to freely move right in front of the initial defensive lines, as maybe they were hoping they could prepare the ground with some spears, perhaps in loose formation, to stop any sort of cavalry sally outs. But Dol Amroth's archers now falling quiet, so we may have just a little lull in proceedings here. Most of Hidden's army, however, still... Well, there's Mordor's army and the rest of Hidden's Harad army as well, punching right through the middle to come up against the one Dol Amrothian defence in Winged Swordsman's command, or under Winged Swordsman's command. And those archers not going to be continuing to target them down for the rest. Over here we do have Khand. I mean, Khand have got an interesting choice to make as well. The defenders have had to split their focuses somewhat. A couple of the Umbar forces over here having to just marshal the side entrance over that river crossing a little, but you'd have to say that the main threat is probably going to be coming up front, purely because it's going to be the more direct route, and Khand don't have the luxury of being able to spread their numbers too thin. Cavalry and chariots don't come cheap, not the ones that they've decided to bring anyway, and infantry as a whole is going to have to call upon all of its might to deal with the better forces that Umbar can field. Meanwhile, over here, Southron warbands just marshalling the other side of the bridge as well, so no trading back and forth of any sort of range damage for the time being over here. Like I said, I don't think Harad is really going to be more of a token gesture when Harad start to do that. Umbar, of course, even with the maybe slightly fewer archers than expected based on the composition phase, but still they should have few issues domineering Harad at long range. Maybe a few more with Khand and maybe Mordor as well. It is a fairly intimidating sight, all of those Haradrim. Arathirim as well. Good opportunity for a few charges there. Khand will be hoping for a little bit of support as well, I'm sure, from their allies, sending over a bit of infantry just to help them push through the main route, and Hidden perhaps doing so, although maybe Haradrim spearmen, Khand would have hoped for something a little bit more heavy hitting than that, but we shall see. Actually, it's going to have to be times 2 speed, isn't it? And maybe jump the gun a little bit with those initial volleys, expecting things to get underway a little bit more quickly than ultimately it looks like it has ended up being. Belagair archers in a good position. I mean, traversing bridges, as always in Medieval 2, is a little bit of a pain. Interesting setup over there with the rivers and the lakes, the Oxbow Lake. Harad setting the table. Good positions on the Corsair crossbows, and the Rangers, however, a really good defensive position that Umbar can take up against them. Harad will struggle under such conditions, of course. Still simmering away. Chieftain's Vanguard moving forwards a little bit. Something forced them onto the back foot. Getting a little bit closer to maybe thread the needle, but that close, of course, the Merc crossbows can return fire, and they pack a pretty big wallop, as any crossbow will. So far those Corsair fencers have gotten away with it. Rangers of Castamere getting menaced by the Chieftain's Vanguard as they move forward. I mean, the Rangers of Castamere, if they turned around to fire a volley or two into the Chieftain's Vanguard, would probably do a lot of damage with their base damage. Rangers at this point in the game, it's generally considered that they are still pretty damn strong, even though they have lost their defining trait from the last patch of body-piercing projectiles. They're still very, very effective, though pretty squishy. Each arrow that lands from those Chieftain's Vanguard is causing a kill. There is a lot of Umbar forces in a very narrow passageway, actually. This whole setup might be a little bit more difficult for Khan to get through maybe than they would have hoped. And of course we have the luxury of knowing about those Corsair fences as well. Starting to see the first forays of infantry across the river now. I mean, it's all well and good sending some units, but I don't think these Harad spearmen are going to be able to accomplish too much. Dol Amroth will be pretty comfortable in an isolated melee engagement with them. Taking the bait though, not wanting to come around the corner just yet. I think they want to hit from both sides. Harad to come to that crossroads there and attack like so. Mordor coming over to this side of things. It does look as though this is going to be where the first melee engagements truly begin. Harad sending forward some Southron archers as well. For the time being, going to take cover behind the buildings, I would assume, but return fire into the archers up there, certainly into the Rangers of Castamere would be useful, less so than Naru based on the elevation and the disparity between the two units. You're not really going to achieve a great deal there. Still nothing yet. Over here, Canned being given a free route up here at the very least, but they will have a pretty dense formation waiting for them on the other side of the checkpoint that's up here. Balagaya footman shielding the Naru sentinels, the real centerpiece of this little defense. The one downside to this defense, as much as it is very narrow, which Umbar can take advantage of, there's not really a good position to get your own archers and ranged units in to support against the Khandish infantry, not like there is over here, of course, with the big elevation advantages that Umbar do possess just in behind their front lines at ground level. Now the Southron archers maybe going to try and force the issue, firing into the Dol Amroth defenders, but this is enough for Dol Amroth to be coaxed forward, although I don't think they'll mind too much, because this is going to be a relatively straightforward affair for them. Even under arrow fire like that, it's not particularly accurate, and of course from the front, those pretty large shields that the Dol Amroth infantry do possess will start to earn their keep. Are they going to be sending forward anything with a little bit more panache? Southron Warband, I suppose, do fit that bill. Though perhaps they will need the dismounted Serpent Guard. The Arathirim getting a bit of a charge in there, nothing too devastating, but perhaps routing them would be the true prize at this stage. Beast Hunters taking a lot of damage on the approach. Getting hit by the archers in behind. I mean, Rangers of Nimrodel, 2 units of them, the Castamere's Rangers. A lot of these archers usually would be a little bit more difficult to use if they were being counter-skirmished, but based on their position, of course, that mitigates a lot of that problem. Free to shoot at whatever they wish. Again, another attempted charge coming in. A little bit more of a solid-looking front line when the dismounted Serpent Guard are in amongst it, however, so this battle has truly begun in earnest. Not allowing those javelins to get set, though, are they? What about the others? Are we seeing any sort of movement from the other attackers? Yes is the answer. We do have some Corsairs out in front here who are, I guess, effectively being the ablative armour to try and prevent those Harad javelins from doing their thing over here. Oh, and that was a blank fire. Trying to retreat quickly, but I don't think they're going to be able to do that. The worst of both worlds, no javelin volley, and also getting caught out in melee. The Alcarondas Legion thinking of moving forward. I mean, the Corsairs are poor enough in melee that the Beast Hunters won't be too worried about them, I don't think. It's more, if they get caught out by the Alcarondas Legion, then they will be in real trouble. Belagire Archers and Flaming Shot being used, maybe a little bit early for Flaming Shot. Can really pay dividends against a force like Harad, but this is still early enough in the battle, the numbers are still big enough that I don't think we're going to be seeing too much in the way of morale issues for any faction involved. Yeah, it's going to be a difficult position to try and push their way through. Their Orc fodder marching forward. Still a portion of Y2K's army over there as well, but no huge rush yet to join Hidden in committing a lot of units forward. Well, slowly edging forward as well are Canned. Closer and closer, those big wicker shields that they have will be helpful against all of these archers that are in place. Over here, an amount of casualties inflicted, probably as a result of the Chieftain's Vanguard once more, and ready to start putting on some pressure over here when the mood strikes them. Having to divide their army up so distinctly, however, does mean that they will have less staying power in both engagements, which will be a bigger problem down here, I think, especially seeing as Dabo is actually going to initiate this engagement first, interestingly enough. Charging in there. Corsairs will struggle against the Nurads, and of course that armour piercing will also be useful against the Belagire spears. Populates a lot of the Umbar front line, more than I was expecting actually, but there are so many ways in that it does behoove the attackers to try and put pressure on as many of these as they can, even if it is risky, because having to divide their attention so much, their Flaming Shots again being used, although over here maybe a little bit more understandable. Indeed, Haradrim forces on this front line do appear to be wavering. Poison arrows coming in from the attackers as well, although there will be the odd instance of friendly fire, and that will also be an issue for Harad's struggling morale. And also the quality of the Alcarondas Legion being added as well. Armour piercing in return, but they'll shoulder that burden considering the rate at which the Haradrim are falling. Spearmen moving forward to try and reinforce the front lines, but this isn't the happiest of hunting grounds so far. Trying to reposition themselves a little bit. The Arathirim again trying to take bites out of the enemy as they begin their initial moves forward. Orc fodder already wavering as a result of that. I mean, again, like we did mentioned in the competition phase, they are at least spears, so if the Arathirim linger too long or choose the wrong time to charge, the Orc fodder could be surprisingly effective considering the sheer disparity in cost and quality between those two, but I don't think that's going to be too much of an issue. Dol Amroth spearmen blocking the way. All spears actually over here on the front line. The low tier trash, the sort of mid tier stalwart, and then the upper tier bulwark that is the Morgul Chosen. Marathon Horse Archers also potentially a little bit damaged. Again, I was a little bit leery about how effective the Horse Archers would necessarily be. We'll see if they can get themselves into a better position than this. I mean, Dol Amroth are having to commit quite a lot of their infantry quite early to defend these positions, so it does behoove the rest of the attackers to maybe try and take advantage of that. Well, Corsairs still acting as the ablative armour, which is all well and good, and there is also the Belagire pikemen on the front line as well to try and make this as cost-effective a front line as possible, but when Trollmen are on the front line, backed up as well, the basics of Umbar are going to be found wanting a little bit, but you don't want to lose this front line. Alcarondas Legion can help plug the gap, of course. Ruhan Beast Hunters able to get in position here in a way that they were not in the middle of the settlement. But again, Corsair crossbows on one side, fire arrow wielding Belagai archers on the other. It's still going to be a costly affair for Harad indeed. And of course Y2K also has to split his attentions a little bit, although I would say this ought to be his primary avenue of attack. Going across the bridge should be a secondary concern, though it should be something that does happen at some point. Victory is a distinct possibility. The Alcarondas Legion already getting into melee and now interrupting the flow of the Muhard Beast Hunters, and this was to Harad's great credit that they were able to get them into position and start going about their work. Beast Hunters being chased by the Alcarondas Legion as well. Belagai pikemen trudging onto the front line. And just like that, Umbar have managed to reverse the tide a little bit. We're concerned about the frames in this battle so far. Meanwhile, Belfalas Marines in a good position to use their throwing projectiles. Dol Amroth Men-at-Arms. Umbar Axguard on the front line will be useful against stuff like the Morgul Chosen, as will of course the Talon Knights. And the Haven Guard of Athalond are in here as well, so Dol Amroth not pulling any punches, and indeed with this backup from Umbar as well, I don't think Mordor are going to be able to get through here with any sort of ease, and with the Haven Guard being directly in contact with the Olag High, maybe we'll see the Olag High burnt down pretty quickly. Again, pretty much all of the Dol Amroth infantry resources are having to be siphoned into service pretty damn quickly in this fight. Uruk infantry moving forward, trying to open up another front line, but they will struggle. 1-to-1, the Dol Amroth Men-at-Arms are better, and they have the backup of the Umbar Axguard as well, so it's going to be a problem for them. Trying to bank those poison projectiles over the buildings. They will hit, but again, I don't think the poison won't be having too detrimental an impact on the defenders yet. It might be the sort of thing late game where things start to falter, things may reverse a bit. Corsair Blackguards taking hits from the Muhard Beast Hunters in support of the frontline champions of Nafarat as well, so continuing to crank up the pressure. And of course Winged Swordsman has committed pretty much all of his high quality units over to try and stem Mordor's advance. So if the champions of Nafarat come in over here, Dol Amroth will mightily struggle against them, and it will need to be their range support that does most of the heavy lifting there, or indeed Umbar coming to their aid, which does appear to be the case. Over here meanwhile, Harad and Khand trying to work in tandem. Variag warriors, pretty cost efficient unit of heavy swordsmen usually. Alcarondas Legion, plenty of damage being done to both sides, but Umbar's infantry still holds the gap between the buildings. Again, another example of javelins being used effectively, this time by Khand. Nomadic Marauder's pretty damn cheap, but I assume the lion's share of the damage to those Alcarondas Legion was done by them. One of the attackers half defeated already, that's probably Hidden's army. Variag Bowman over there, Norad Footman struggling, and they're lonesome. Again, a large part of that will be due to the range support up on that hill over there, because usually Brotherhood of the Spear and Nurad units would be able to deal with basics from Umbar, but all of these units in support going to be a real problem. Over here is where Khand maybe pose more of a threat to Umbar, but it's going to be a real slow burn of an engagement this, in a very narrow position. Not really a huge amount of range support can be forthcoming for either side, so it's just going to be the long grind really. And with the Nara and Iru Sentinels at their centre, Umbar will be feeling pretty good about it, though still interspersed throughout it are units like Corsairs providing the numbers, and you know, Nara and Iru Royal Guard are very strong, but of course they are a hybrid unit, so not as strong as a dedicated one would be. So maybe the average quality of the Khandish forces is higher, but the unit types and the high end is in Umbar's favour. Meanwhile, frame rate. It's been a little while since we had a battle where the frames started to chug like this, and a large part of it is due to large infantry blobs forming and lots of arrow fire crisscrossing across the battlefield. Brotherhood of the Axe. Balance of forces evenly matched. Moving in, but they will be hoping to tip the balance in the attacker's favour, though they surely will be one of the first units that the archers will continue to target. I mean, Nomadic Marauders in behind enemy lines. Murad Storm Guard starting to pour forwards as well. Could be an important moment in the battle, this. There is a good opportunity for Khan to start picking away at some of these outer defences, and that's where chaos can reign, the dominoes can start to fall. Murad Storm Guard chasing the Blackguards. Of course, they can't allow them to be kited backwards, but multi-layered Corsair Blackguards may yet prove to be the undoing of the Murad Storm Guard. Haradran moving forward. Oof, those frames. On this front line, you can see the arrow fire previously moving in as we came across. And they're doing a good amount of damage to this front line. Patrolmen on the front line, Uruk infantry. So this attack is still going, if nothing else. Mercenary crossmen maybe have used up all their ammunition. I mean, that's probably a bad sign for the attackers if all of those crossbows were used wisely. Crossbow bolts were used wisely, I should say. Being used now as a melee cavalry unit, which of course is not their forte, but everyone needs to muck in. Now, Womb Raider moving back across ranges of Nimrodel. A lot of units being poured onto the front line now, but all of these Umbarim so far managing to hold the line, but those Trollmen have definitely proven to be chunkier challenge than anything that's come before on that front line. Meanwhile, it says defeat seems certain for the Dol Amrothians, which is a little bit surprising. I mean, the Nazgul are here on the front line. You can see them in there with the Sauron's Will. The Olag High is still here, so I mean, it's a pretty heavyweight clash, this. I mean, from a Mordor perspective, they kind of need this to go well now that they've committed this much. Flaming shots still being traded by both sides. And the Olag High are still alive and kicking, and the Haven Guard, only 17 of them remain. I think the Olag High will fall away, but is it worth it? Killing off the Haven Guard, a few more units as well. The Nazgul are in here to pick up the slack. Although there goes the Mordor General. Good opportunistic charge there. And there goes the Candish General as well. Double whammy for the attackers. Not what they needed. Temple Executioners open to a charge. Dol Amroth Men-at-Arms managing to stay out of harm's way of those blackened longswords at the moment. Yeah, in comes another charge, and they can't really allow the Executioners to be cycle charged like this. Such a high quality unit would be so useful as the battle rages on. Yeah, two generals. Mordor in particular could feel the sting of that. Have they indeed? Defeat seems certain still though on that front line. Nazgul and the Olag Hide's power spike making a real difference. Over here, I mean, the Alcarondas Legion forming up a good solid defensive position, but they are going to be reliant on that range damage continuing to flow, the defenders, because otherwise that armor piercing the Harad have on the front line, twinned with the quality that's now there, going to be a real problem. Meanwhile, Serpent Archers also getting onto the front line. I mean, how defensively savvy they are means that this is also not an inconsiderable development. Belagai Pikemen leaving as well, not wanting to get caught. Over here, meanwhile, Harad probably have a good opportunity to crank up the pressure over here as well. Now you can sort of see the tide of the battle starting to turn a little bit now, as much as those two general losses will worry the attackers. They do still have the wind in their sails a bit now. They're starting to make some forward progress. Belagai footmen now fleeing the front lines as well. Tommy's units continuing to take hits from the Serpent Archers. There goes the Umbar General on the far side of the field. Let's go and see what's happening over here. I mean, yeah, the average quality of Khand is starting to win the day here, and weight of numbers, meaning that the pikes can't have it all their own way. Yeah, the loss of a general as well, the Womb Raiders general, but Umbar one of the factions in the game which the loss of a general is not a terrible thing for them. It's obviously not great, but enough of their high-end units in particular are locked morale that they can continue to do their thing. Brotherhood of the Wain, meanwhile, have been utilised here, which is all well and good, but a few of them have fallen. I'm just going to follow their progress for a bit. It doesn't look like they've got any... Oh no, they do still have some ammunition. I was going to say, I mean, they are regular crossbows, although the model of them makes them look like a really chunky Chuko Nu. Continuing to just take a few pot shots. I mean, Canned have made this battlefield a little bit more chaotic now, and probably of all the attackers, they've had the most luck so far. Ariad Bowman getting in to face off against the Valagair archers. Defeat seems certain for the moment, but I think that's more down to the presence of the Nara and Ira Royal Guard than anything else. Chieftain's Vanguard trying to offer what support they can for the units that have made it this far. Brotherhood of the Shadows. Corsair Blackguards. Trading as well. Throwing projectiles have been a pretty important factor in this battle so far for both sides. Indeed, I think for the attackers it's been probably the cornerstone of a lot of their progress and the damage they've been able to inflict. Dismounted Serpent Guard doing a good job here against some Belagair pikemen that weren't quite set. I mean, the Rangers of Castamere are coming in now as well, but Muhard, Beast Hunters in a good position. Try and do a bit of damage to them, and of course the Rangers, I mean, they do have good melee defense, but they're a considerably less scary unit when the time comes for them to be thrown into melee. Of course, they're Blackguards throwing a javelin or two. Doing a good job. I mean, over here, both sides fighting to a standstill. Dol Amroth almost completely gone. Umbar picking up the slack. The javelin fire might yet be enough, but the Serpent Archers and what remains of the Southrons threatening to overrun this limited position now of Alcarondas Legion. Demons of the Desert rolling forth as well. There goes another Umbar general, Canned finishing off a second general. It's been a good battle so far for them, like I mentioned. Rangers of Nimrodel, much like the Castamere's Rangers, being utilised now as a melee unit. Victory seems certain. I mean, over here, the Arathirim have been used effectively as the battle's gone on, you have to say. Without them, the quality that Mordor still possess over here probably would have been enough. Although as soon as we get there, they very riskily wade through the Temple Executioners, but still there's some Olakai remaining. Goes to show their resilience, I suppose. Still 7 Nazgul as well, so maybe Mordor do have the quality yet, but there's pikes and that cavalry can still be used a little bit more freely. Demons of the Desert getting caught out a little bit there by the Arathirim, but the Arathirim need to be careful. The demons do have anti-cavalry and melee, and if they get a volley on the approach, that'll pretty much devastate what remains of them. If anything, I'd be tempted to go for the low-hanging fruit and try and finish off Mordor, because those elite units could still be a real threat as the battle creaks towards its latter stages. Tommy still has a few reinforcements that can be committed, and Harad are threatening to burst the dams over here now as well. Dismounted Serpent Guard running through the very thin front line of Alcarondas Legion. Able to get in behind enemy lines. The pikes are on the way forward, the Nara Sentinels, but I don't think, are they going to make it in time? I mean, Harad themselves have taken a real beating in this battle as well, but they still have more reinforcements, I think, and you can see over here the Trollman completely ran through the front line to silence the Corsair crossbows, which is worthwhile, you would have to say. Corsair crossbows, squishy enough to be killed fairly quickly in melee, but if you leave them to do that range damage, they can devastate forces. And the Harbingers of Castamere, well suited for fighting the Trollmen. Trollmen's lower melee defense really going to be a problem against those two-handed swords that the Harbingers wield. 7 archers. Do Harad have the numbers to make this stick? I mean, they're doing a pretty good job over here, to say, over yonder. We actually completely missed this fight as the battle's gone on, but Umbar victorious by the looks of things. Harad maybe not committing as much forward as they could have done there. But again, I think that's probably a good move from Harad considering it was a bridge approach. Parathil Horse Archers making a nuisance of themselves to the attacking forces that still haven't been fully committed yet, which that's pretty much it actually, that one unit of Southrons. Everything else that the attackers have now is more or less in the settlement. And over here, hidden Harad forces securing this initial position. It's cost an awful lot, but this victory is important, and Canned, who have been doing pretty well for themselves, more Brotherhood of the Wain have fallen. I think they are going to be defeated down here, Canned, but Stormguard won't go down without a fight, and it's more the hill path where Canned will be hoping their choices pay off. Our Sentinels still doing a good job in all fairness for the Wind Raider. The centrepiece of this defence over here, and they're still certainly not done yet. Backed up by mostly lowly Corsairs, a few high-end units with them, but nothing too scary. The Corsair Fencers were activated. The ambush, I don't know if that's been super effective. I mean, they've just turned around some halberds and now they can utilise the choke point in the same way that Umbar have been using it against them. So, but it has also meant that the weight of numbers in the frontal assault hasn't actually been able to continue, so it has stymied the momentum Canned did possess over here, and it could yet end in Canned's total defeat, which would be unfortunate for the attackers given how it's gone so far. Corsairs, or a Corsair, just taking in the sights on the hill over there. Not a huge amount going on over here anymore. Still some Harad forces now moving across to try and aid their Mordor and Harad allies over here. Parathil Horse Archers still being a nuisance. I mean, Horse Archers are intended to be that that kind of unit. Harassment, as it were, but usually at range. We've seen more examples of that in melee in this battle, honestly. I'm sure they've used up all their ammunition, so I'm sure we just missed what was actually the key contributions they have made. Rondas Legion, Arathirium still, that wasn't really too great of a rear charge, and they will need the full charge to land if they are to do meaningful damage to this fairly healthy unit of Serpent Guard. Harad's still slowly lurching forward now, and the attackers taking stock of everything on the field. The attackers probably feeling okay about their chances. I think the defenders are starting to run low on basically everything, but the attackers don't have a limitless pool of resources to draw from now either, so they do need to be maybe a little bit careful. There goes, I think that's Hidden's Harad General. His army depleted enough that that could be a problem. Only 2 Parathil Horse Archers in this unit remain. Soon to be 0 as the pikes pass them by. Well, 1 at the very least. And over here, the healthier unit of Parathil Horse Archers, still loitering with intent. Much of Umbar remaining up there. Again, is this going to be a case of the defenders not abandoning defensive positions quickly enough? Could be. Victory seems certain from the Corsair Blackguards. How long will that last as Harad continue to push forward? They don't have a huge amount of quality left. I mean, they've got 5 champions of Nafrat, but that's hardly a horrifying force. Those Demons of the Desert might be though. 75 of them late game. Exactly the sort of thing which might be a bridge too far for the defenders. The Parathil Horse Archers Launching a few javelins in. Nazgul's still alive as well. Only 3 of them. So it was a... I mean, Mordor really don't have much left at all. Just a few very high quality units. But it was a tough battle for them. And ultimately their loss, I think, has been Y2K's gain. Been able to consolidate a bit more of his strength for the late game. That may end up really paying off with the Demons of the Desert. Drums? What's going on over here? Ah, I see. He's trapped in the building. Well, there we have it. Anyway. How are Canned getting on? Chariots making their way up here now. And I think this will finally... Oh no, actually, the Corsair Fencers. Naranaru Royal Guard, I mean... Those crossbow bolts. I think this is going to... Whoever wins over here is going to be a highly Pyrrhic victory, but... Chariots can still be used to good effect. Chieftain's Vanguard, all of these ranged units. Probably enough to finish Umbar off, so probably a Pyrrhic victory in Cann's favour. Which from an attacking point of view probably is good. You can send the chariots over to the other side and try and help Harad get you over the line in this fight. Still, in those Corsair Fencers though, that ambush has proven to be pretty good. Otherwise I think Canned would have had a more comfortable victory over here, but as it is, the addition of these Corsair Fencers, who may yet actually finish off the remaining Candish infantry and leave Canned with only their mounted units to support Harad with. So that decision from the Womb Raider has paid off. Are we seeing some sort of retreat? Yes, is the answer. Umbar going to head back to the final stand. There can be no retreat from here. And there was a map we did not too long ago that was kind of like this, where the final stand was a reasonably open plateau with 2 approaches either side. And that also was when the armies were kind of on their last legs. On that occasion the defenders didn't have enough. The attackers were able to overwhelm them in the long run. Is that going to be the case again? Still got some Arathirium. Still those Corsair crossbows actually skulking around. I don't know if the attackers have realised they're still alive, but they can get in position and launch a volley or 2 into the backs of all the units once they've committed themselves. Thinking about charging in, but thinking better of it when the Southron pikemen knew they were coming. You can hardly blame them for that. That unit of Southron pikemen probably could be best used as a rear guard, because you can't afford for those Arathirium to get some nasty charges. The interior here could have been an interesting position to maybe allow the attackers in and then shoot them in the back with archers still on these cliffs, but we may never know if that would have been an effective ploy now. Corsair Fencers ripping their way through what remains of the Variags, so Umbar do still have a little bit more. The Brotherhood of the Wain on the way back with the Parathil Horse Archers. Well, the Parathil Horse Archers may get in the way. Try and stop them from influencing this fight back here. Bit of damage being done to the Rangers of Castamere. Serpent Archers as well. Still Arathirium managing to get around. This is where actually having more entrances in and out has proven to be... Ooh, that's bold. Having more entrances and more choke points working in the defenders' favour there actually, although I'm not sure I would have made that Hail Mary play right then. Southron pikemen marching their way up. I mean, it's not exactly a really intimidating army, is it? I mean, the Demons of the Desert trying to soften the enemy up. Dismounted Serpent Guard on the way, and Demons of the Desert still, of course, a real threat in melee terms as well. They are squishier than all of their Trollman brethren, but by no means pushovers. Archers firing away. Both sides looking very battered and bruised, very fatigued at this stage. Brotherhood of the Wain firing away at the Corsair fences still. If nothing else, it's keeping the chariots and the Khandish horse archers away from the main engagement, which for the defenders would be devastating at this point. Those chariots getting in and amongst things would be enough to disrupt to the point where maybe it would decide the whole battle. I mean, the Harbingers of Castamere in infantry terms, when you consider their numbers, probably the strongest entity left on the field. There are Nazgûl still alive, but only 3 of them, and they've seen a lot of combat, so how much staying power do they have left? The Demons of the Desert getting engaged in melee a little bit. That is enough to disrupt their rhythm for the time being. You'd have to say that a volley or 2 from them surely is game over. Rangers of Castamere trying to slip behind enemy lines, get in and amongst things a little bit. And they too will be able to interrupt the Demons of the Desert, so good moves from Umbar. Denying the attackers temporarily, if nothing else, their most potent weapon remaining. And Harbingers of Castamere forcing their way through the initial infantry cover that they have as well. Not enough remaining. Nazgûl and what remains of those Temple Executioners who got messed around a bit by the Arathirium earlier on, as we remember. Not enough numbers there, and you can see how desperate the defenders are to neutralise these Demons of the Desert, and it will cost the Harbingers of Castamere actually. They are taking damage as a result, pushing their way through those quality units, and the demons themselves are not exactly pushovers. Is it going to be enough? Defeat seems certain for the demons at the moment. Belegaer archers are there. There's no cover on this side now, so if the chariots were to arrive at this moment, it would probably be game, set, match, but they aren't exactly in any great hurry, are they? Southron pikemen, I mean late game pikes, as I often say. Even when they are relatively lowly pikes like this, could be enough. Dol Amroth's general finally falls. The Arathirium have been a real presence in this battle, but they finally fall away. Beast Hunter's not exactly a tour de force in melee, but still, Brotherhood of the Wain. And they have those 18 Belegaer archers, but there'll barely be a speed bump even for the depleted chariots, as they do make their way up now. Only 3 chariots remain, but that might be enough, and I think in conjunction with the pikes, it's interesting. I think those chariots, I mean, that is the final play from the attackers really. If they don't work out in the way that they want, I think the defenders might actually have the quality with those Harbingers to be able to see themselves over the line. The Demons of the Desert melting away pretty quickly once their hit points are gone, as any Trollman class units tend to. There's Malcarondas Legion still alive as well, 27 surrounding action. They have some ranged still in them, Brotherhood of the Wain, but they're not going to do damage quickly enough. The DPS won't be high enough for those chariots to do their thing. They will need to come down here, I think, and although again, sending units flying would include their own, and unfortunately for them, that may result in a rout, considering the quality of units they still have left. Nazgûl still live to a certain extent. The horse archers on the way down, the chariots getting caught. Doing their best to sort of roll through the Harbingers. Definitely a disruptive element here, but starting to fall away. The final Haradrim general falls as well. Very, very close this one. Could go either way. Again, those Nazgûl, there may only be 2 of them left, but when things are this close, when things are this desperate for both sides, That can be the big difference maker. Victory seems certain for Harad now. Chariots coming in here doing their thing, but it's now the defenders' turn to try and affect this engagement with some mounted units. Parathil Horse Archers probably less scary than the chariots, but still something the attackers are going to have to try and deal with. Serpent Archers doing a good job on the front line in conjunction with those Nazgul. And there's still a fairly decent amount of time left considering the low amount of troops on the field, so it's going to be sort of the punch-drunk stagger to the finish for whoever manages to win this. Beast Hunters are still Brotherhood of the Wain now, content perhaps that they have slightly the upper hand in this engagement to take the odd pot shot with that crossbow. And those crossbows must have been out of ammunition. They were used as a force similar to the Corsair fences on the other side, but of course far less effective at doing that job. Parathil Horse Archers still charging in, trying to do their best, but as they do charge in, of course, the fact that pikes are present on this front line is harming them. Southron pikemen shaken though. I mean, if they lose over 70 pikes at this late stage, that could make the battle flip-flop once more. Occasional mechanical twang of the crossbows. They are shaken, but they are still clinging on. 3 Corsair Blackguards. I mean, at this late stage, anything's good. I mean, the Balaguer Archers may have been routing, but at least they're now fighting to the death because they bumped into the engagement. If nothing else, a blow that was intended for a unit that was still useful might land on them instead. And these are the margins that we're dealing with at this stage. Archers of Castamere getting in and amongst things once again, wanting to try and go for quantity of kills here, try and isolate the Nazgul perhaps, and the Harbingers will rip their way through the Beast Hunters. And I think that might be the final general that was on the field. The final Umbar general dies, so no one has any generals left. As we mentioned though, Umbar far better tooled to deal with the reduction in morale of that than Harad are. Chariot falls away as well. One Iron Aragorn, I mean, even just one of them at this point might be the difference. Those Serpent Archers though, 18 of them and the 2 Nazgul. And the pikes. Like, in terms of composition, you should probably be backing Harad to get the job done here. But can the Harbingers do their thing? Iron Aragorn still have his bow. Occasional arrow perhaps loosed. Ooh, and that's a problem. That's a real problem. That might be the moment. As long as those pikes remained, Harad looked to be doing the business. A ranger there slicing through one of the Serpent Archers, and indeed the Serpent Archers starting to tumble in numbers now as well. Broken fighting to the death, so stats gone completely. Just going to stand there and be killed in melee, so it's going to have to be the Nazgul. Beast Hunters probably will go the same way of the Southron Pikes. Serpent Archers though, 10 remain. Occasional arrows still being fired. And that fire arrow enough to rout the Muhards as well, made of slightly sterner stuff mentally than the Southrons perhaps, but in the end, the same outcome. Serpent Archers, 10 remain still. What happened to the Nazgul? Could they have died? Have they been finished off? It's kind of hard to tell from a distance sometimes with the colour schemes involved. I am surprised that there's still this long left in the battle. Is there some sort of sequestered unit that we have yet to really see. I mean, there must be, because there's nothing active other than the Serpent Archers fighting on the front line at this point. Saffron Pikemen numbers now starting to tumble, that they're actually being dealt with. Fighting to the death. One Corsair Blackguard, 5 archers remain. Yeah, the Nazgul, perhaps their exertions earlier on in the fight are what meant they fell before even the Serpent Archers. Harbingers of Castamere a bit fresher and obviously far more numerous. In the end, the difference... But is this everything? Just the occasional shot from the one Iron Royal Guard that remains. I mean, the margin of victory here is going to be very thin. One Serpent Archer remains. They've definitely proven themselves in this battle as well, though. Trying to whittle the defenders down and then also proving their mettle in melee also. Just a bridge too far when you're dealing with a unit like the Harbingers. And that is that, so what remains? Has to be one of the red arrows. Muhard Beast Hunters. Hidden's Southron Pikemen. 42 remain. That's at least one straggler. It's over here then. Well, actually no. Trollmen for 10 Trollmen. Actually, this smacks of a unit which is bugged, actually, to give Hidden or Y2K the out there. Obviously 10 Trollmen probably would have been enough to make the difference in that fight, but it looks as though they might be stuck, because that's not 10 Trollmen, which means the rest of them probably are scattered throughout the field. And so as a result, we're probably going to ×6 our ways to finish here, because I think it is a worthy defender victory which is going to be forthcoming. I mean, 42 Southron Pikemen from the front, maybe. Wouldn't be the biggest surprise, but yeah, they break immediately though. Bit of an odd end to this fight. But I think that was again because some units may have been bugged toward the tail end, but I think the defenders, like I mentioned, worthy victors in the end. They're still going after... Oh yeah, the Troll Drummer might be there. Lots of players admitting defeat. Units that were stuck in the buildings. It says close defeat, but I think the defenders there admitted defeat purely because the battle needed to end and some units were bugged and inaccessible now. So it may say defeat, but actually, of course, defenders very narrowly victorious. Very close battle, this one, and it's nice to see another battle from the new patch as well. Nice to see another new map. So yeah, big thank you to Tommy for allowing me to show this one off. Yeah, I think the defenders were worth their victory there. They did a good job in the upfront defence. I think the attackers found gaps occasionally. Cand in particular started to find a few. Y2K had a lot left in the tank late on after Mordor bore the brunt of the defenders' fury, you have to say. But that was kind of necessary, because to stem Mordor's quality, you know, the Oleg High, the Nazgul, Temple Executioners, Dol Amroth needed to front load, so they needed to sort of commit their Haven Guard early and their Talon Knights early. And there were some high quality Umbar units over there as well to deal with that. So Mordor, by what they committed, effectively made themselves public enemy number one. But like I said, that was to Harad's benefit, because ultimately they were able to then flood over the initial Umbar defence, which is what was the catalyst for the late game retreat to the final stand for Umbar. Just in the end, Umbar had enough left in the tank, enough quality, and of course, as we mentioned throughout the battle, with the losses of the generals, Umbar are better suited for the loss of a general than many factions in the game, especially comparatively speaking to Harad. And that did prove to be a big factor in this battle, with that last big block of 70-odd Southron pikemen. If they'd have stayed fighting, it probably would have been enough for Harad to win, but in the end, the morale got the better of them, whereas the Black Númenóreans, redeemed though they may be, were able to hold their nerve in that later game period. So let's see what did the damage for the three Umbar armies. Tommy's army, Harbinger's doing very, very well, of course, the ones to just about get the whole effort over the line. Alcarondas Legion maybe less kills than you would have expected from them, given their quality and given the fact that lots of the units they were facing off against, they should have been pretty good against. I mean, a lot of the Harad forces, for example, and basic Mordor Uruks, but Alcarondas Legion also were given some pretty tough jobs on that front line, sort of in that mid-game period where the defenders really, or the attackers rather I should say, really started to ratchet up the pressure. Alcarondas Legion were there more as a defensive act than the aggressiveness that they can also be used with. Harbingers, Rangers of Castamere doing very, very nicely. Belagair Arch as well, the combination of the punch of the crossbows and the Rangers, and then also the flaming shot of the Belagair Archers did pay off in the end. And then regular Corsairs, obviously, just as the fodder. Naranaru Sentinels also very important for the defenders to clog up those choke points. Several units breaking 200 for Tumihai's army. Naranaru Royal Guard doing nicely, as did the Rangers Merc crossbows. You didn't really see a great deal of them because I think they were used very early on, but 229 kills is very nice indeed. Again, the Alcarondas Legion maybe less than you'd hope, but good defensively anyway. And finally, the Womb Raider Naranaru Sentinels, 367 in that narrow choke point, doing very, very well for themselves. Naranaru Royal Guard, but that ambush really did pay off, didn't it? That unit of Corsair Fencers, nearly 500 kills, 493, and without that high level of kills, the defenders would not have won. So yeah, that little ambush was definitely worthwhile from the Womb Raider, and the Corsair Fencers repaid him massively. Umbar X-Guard doing okay also, and several of the more basic units obviously not getting the most kills. But yeah, like I said, big thank you for Tommy and all the players involved for allowing me to show this battle replay off. Nice to see Umbar for the first time in a while as well. I do have a real soft spot for Umbar. I like the aesthetic that they have, and they managed to really showcase what they're all about today, and a defending victory as well, which people should be pretty glad about, I would have thought, and a narrow one as well, very competitive indeed. I do have another battle to show off as well, one that was sent to me by, I believe, Adin Men. I don't know who is responsible for the creation of the map, but it is going to be Umbar once more, and it's going to be a showdown between Umbar and Númenor, I believe, so that should be an interesting thing. I think the setting is going to be on the island of Númenor itself as well, so Umbar picking up their mantle as an evil faction once again, so their time in the sun was a short one. But yeah, that should be an interesting one. That's the one that I have in my backlog as well. As I'm recording this, there are a few weeks in advance that I have recorded ahead. Got one last small trip away for work before the year's out, but that'll only be 5 days long, so you won't even notice that I'm gone, really. And yes, of course, as we march towards the end of the year as well, going to start thinking about doing a wrap-up, and I do think that there is the necessity to talk about maybe some changes, some overhauls to the channel as well. Something probably does need to be done in that regard. Been very much in survival mode since the start of the year, where I had to reduce my schedule, but we shall see. Anyway, enough waffle. Big thank you to Tommy, big thanks to all the players. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.